Hello. In light of some recent changes to my AAA sheets, and in light of some occasional confusion that has occurred about how they function in the past, I've decided to make a brief video, or hopefully brief anyway, on the functionality and what has changed. The version on screen at the moment is the version as is available online as of 1st of March 2018. Obviously, by the time everyone sees this, this version will have been superseded by the latest version. The main change between the two is the elimination of this column here, full build. The only difference between full build and full extended range with manual AA in this old version of the sheet is that the full build also includes BFT and the effects of the AA flag. That has been changed to slightly different functionality. Let me pull up the new sheet and explain. This is the new sheet. As you can see, the column in question is missing. Instead, you can activate or deactivate BFT and the flag by inputting a value in here. Specifically, any value of 0 or less deactivates, any value greater than 0 activates. I used 1 and 0. I would have liked to have used tick boxes, but I'm using Excel 2003, and with Excel 2003, the only way to do a tick box is via a macro, which tend to make most antivirus and security features go absolutely crazy, for good reason. There's a number of ways they can, shall we say, do undesirable things. So I've avoided the macro functionality and simply gone with a simple numerical entry, 0 for off, 1 for on. If you watch here, next to the conqueror, you can see the effect. 2,969 without BFT, 3,563 with. Likewise, the same for the flag. This here is new functionality, however. You can use this to simulate providing AAA support to another ship. Simply enter the distance between you and the friendly ship that you are supporting, and it will recalculate with the additional standoff factored in. This, however, does assume that the carrier player approaches in such a manner as to minimize the exposure to your AAA fire. Not all carrier players will do this, obviously, and you may wish to use a slightly shorter value to simulate that. However, it does rather brutally, when you use it, emphasize just how important a good AAA build is to providing effective AAA support. For example, if we set this to 3 kilometers, a relatively short value, anyone without at least AFT or AA Mod 2 cannot provide any effective support versus torpedo bombers. Their standoff from target ship is such that they will never enter range of your AAA before they make the drop. And even with it, the amount of AAA support provided is relatively minimal, unless you have full extended range and preferably also manual AA. Even then, the level of support is surprisingly low without defensive fire. It must be noted, versus dive bombers, the effect is much less severe. In addition to this main master sheet, which includes torpedo bomber values here, dive bomber values there, then torpedo bombers with defensive fire, dive bombers with defensive fire, and then this tells you what percentage of the total damage applied is from your dual purpose AA. That part is versus torpedo bombers, this part is versus dive bombers. This gives you the base value here, and then this tells you how many times better that particular change to your build will be compared to the base values. And yes, these values are accurate. Typically, AA Mod 2, AFT and manual AA are worth between 2.5 and 3.5 times increases on your overall AA power. If BFT and the flag is included, this value can exceed a 4 times multiplier, although you won't actually see that for reasons that are a little complicated to go into. It's down to how I do the math, basically. When you add BFT and AFT, it will cause this value to increase as well as the values used to produce these percentages. As a result, you won't actually see the multiplier applied. I need to fix that. Hopefully, by the time I actually release this sheet in a day or two, it should be fixed. And then this gives you the percentage which is from dual purpose AA, again in a separate sheet, just for ease of finding and reference. Now I quickly want to do a breakdown of how the sheets actually work. I'm going to use US cruisers as my baseline, but as you can see, range values are inputted here. You input a 1 or a 0 to indicate whether it's affected by MCFAA, 0 for no, 1 for yes. Defensive fire, same. Defensive fire multiplier is listed here, and then you input the raw DPS values. At that point, it then uses the range values and the plane closure speed values to calculate the time spent in each AAA aura, which is listed here for torpedo bombers and here for dive bombers. Obviously, if you have range extension, those values change. And you can see here, it calculates new extended ranges based on various builds. And then along here, in these 4 boxes, it calculates the new times in AAA. As you can see, range extension, particularly visible on the Baltimore, has a significant positive effect on the ability of 40mm Bofors guns to contribute to AAA. This lists the manual AA DPS, and this basic DPS column lists the adjusted DPS. The sheet always assumes that you are click focusing targets, and even without manual AA, there is a 1.3 times multiplier to the AAA DPS for click focusing a target. Therefore, that has to be accounted for in the base DPS actually used, which is this column. If you then want to see the breakdown of total damage dealt by gun, these are the various values from which these 3 sheets down here pull. Don't worry about them, just scroll along to the end and you will find this section. Yellow is torpedo bombers without defensive fire. Green is dive bombers with defensive fire. Blue is torpedo bombers with defensive fire, and purple is dive bombers with defensive fire. So basically, without, with, when it comes to defensive fire, and it always goes torpedo, dive bomber, torpedo, dive bomber. This allows you to see the specific breakdown of damage output. As you can see, for the Des Moines, the majority of the damage, without any modifiers, comes from the 76mm AAA guns. However, when you move to a full manual AA build with full range extension, the dual purpose guns become a significantly more important part of the AA package, although the 76mm still maintain the majority of the output. Conversely, that is not true of Baltimore, and in fact Baltimore is much more typical of how most cruisers, battleships, carriers, etc. will display. In general, the dual purpose guns are almost always at least half the total output, and often push 60 to 70% on many ships. Finally, if you want to understand how some of the constants are done, we'll look here. The formatting sheet, by the way, all this, that just handles these. That's all that is. It's a common reference sheet. I should probably hide that, but I've never really gotten around to it. The constant sheet is where things like plane speed are inputted, standoff distances, AFT plus AA2 modifier. I'm not actually sure I use that, by the way. I think I've manually inputted the multipliers myself. This is your base standoff, and then this is the standoff modified by the support standoff value. If we input a value of 3 there, and then flick back to the constant sheet, you can see the standoff has increased. Note, the reason dive bombers have a minus 0.2 standoff is to represent the fact that dive bombers, when they actually perform the drop, do a bit of a jiggle over the target before they release the bombs, meaning they briefly pause directly overhead. And that is more or less what that is designed to emulate. As noted, you can input a new plane velocity. For example, if we change that to 150 knots, the assumed plane velocity goes up. 135 knots is, or at least was at the time I originally created this, the Tier 7 average plane speed. I'd actually have to check to see if the USN carrier rebalance has altered this. It probably has, as it altered many other factors. I just never bothered to recalculate that. In the long term, I would like to have tier specific plane speeds, but that is a rather complicated piece of work to do. Also of note, none of these values include AA Mod 3. Again, that's a bit of a more complicated piece to integrate into the sheet. Hopefully this little overview has explained everything you need to know. If you have any questions, do please post them in the thread and I will try and answer them.